Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's Lunch and Learn program. We have a fantastic program for you today that will leave you inspired and also ready to try out some new recipes. I'm excited to be back with you all, and we have some excellent speakers and topics lined up for our fall and winter programming. This year, our Holocaust Center turns 35 years old. The Holocaust Center was started by survivors as a response to Holocaust denial with a mission to teach about the Holocaust. The stories of local Holocaust survivors are the core of our work. It is through these stories that the history becomes personal. We learn about the Holocaust not through statistics, but through a person's memories, feelings, choices, and experiences, and maybe even through their recipes. 2 months ago, I was contacted by a PhD student at the University of Washington. She is working on a dissertation related to Sephardic Jews and the Holocaust. Through her research at Yad Vashem in Israel, she found a letter from a Sephardic Jewish man in Germany trying to regain his Turkish citizenship so that he could leave Nazi Germany. The letter was written in Ladino and French. Ladino is like the Spanish and Sephardic version of Yiddish. Upon researching the letter and the family, she discovered that the man's daughter and granddaughter were sent to Theresienstadt. They survived and, to her amazement, settled in Washington State, the very state where she is working on her PhD. Through this student, we were introduced to Inez, the granddaughter, who is now in her 80s and is living in the Tacoma area. Inez has since shared her family stories with us on video and has donated a collection of her family's artifacts to the Holocaust Center for preservation and education. These histories and stories are everywhere. For example, just yesterday, my colleague Richard, who is behind the scenes on today's program, told me that he reconnected with a childhood friend from Seattle and learned that his parents were Holocaust survivors who settled in the Seattle area. Our Holocaust Center makes an effort to acknowledge the lives and contributions of the many survivors who made Washington State their home. They help to build our communities and their histories, strengthen and inspire the generations that came after them and continue today. One of these survivors, Henry Friedman, who is also one of the founders of our Holocaust Center, will be speaking at our upcoming Voices for Humanity luncheon on September 24th. I know some of you are already signed up. 600 plus so far are registered. Thank you to all of you who are already registered. And there's still time to sign up. We hope you can join us for this wonderful event to remember, celebrate, and invest in Holocaust education. The hard deadline is this Sunday, so if you aren't registered yet and want to attend, please register today. Today, we have the opportunity to honor the memories and families of survivors through their recipes. Author and editor, Dr. Maria Zalewska, is with us today to tell us about this collection of more than 100 recipes and the stories that accompany them. Maria is the executive director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation, a New York-based nonprofit organization. Since 2020, Dr. Zalewska has served as the Honorary Consul of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum in the U.S. She is also a member of the International Research Advisory Board of the Institute for Holocaust Research in Sweden. Born in Poland, Dr. Zalewska completed her PhD in cinema and media from the University of Southern California of Cinematic Arts. Her dissertation examined Holocaust memory across various media types, from films to Instagram selfies. She has presented her ongoing research at over 30 international conferences and has guest lectured at multiple organizations and universities in the US and abroad. In 2022, Maria edited the cookbook Honey Cake and Latkes, Recipe from the Old World by the Auschwitz-Birkenau survivors, which is the topic of conversation today. The book remained a #1 bestseller on Amazon for 9 weeks. Its publication has been covered and reviewed by 42 newspapers and magazines in the US, Poland, Australia, Israel, and the United Kingdom, including the New York Times, the New Yorker, Forbes, Glamour magazine, The Telegraph, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency, U.S. Weekly, Self Magazine, Bon Appetit, and more. We are so lucky to have Dr. Maria Zalewska joining us today from New York. We will take questions at the end of the program, but please type your questions in at any time into the Q&A. Maria, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Ilana. Thank you so much for inviting me to join this conversation today. I'm really honored.
Will you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your work at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial Foundation? Give us a little context of what you do.
I think after such a kind and thorough introduction, I will speak less about myself, more about the foundation, if that's all right. So our foundation is based in New York City, and everything we do connects our work to the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum in Poland. The three pillars of our work consist of preservation, education, and what we like to call survivors outreach. Preservation work that we do basically means raising money, raising funds to support the preservation of all the original artifacts at the Auschwitz-Birkenau memorial site. That ranges from suitcases. Many of you have been there, so you've seen the artifacts that I'm talking about: suitcases, shoes, documents, toys, all the way to the barracks, crematoria, ruins, etc. Everything. The camp was not meant to last. It was built using poor quality materials, and also it has deteriorated over decades. And our foundation, jointly with our sister foundation in Poland, the Auschwitz-Birkenau Foundation, we've been raising money for preservation efforts for years, and built an endowment that supports it. To education, and I'm mentioning education because that is how our foundation got connected to your center. We run a fellowship, we call it Auschwitz Legacy Fellowship. It invites predominantly non-Jewish American high school teachers on fully funded trips to Poland. We bring them to Warsaw, Krakow, and then we spend 3 days with them at the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum. We equip them with curricula, documentary movies that we made, and they come back home and, using our resources, teach their students. And we have partnered with your organization. We launched our program jointly this year. I just came back from Poland with Brenda, and we had a tremendous time working together with Washington State teachers. So it's been a real treat. And the third thing we do that connects us to today's topic is what we call survivors, excuse me, outreach. And here I sometimes say that it's the most wonderful and the saddest part of my work, because I've become very close with survivors over the years. And as you all know, we've lost many survivors, especially in the past few years. COVID has accelerated this inevitable process, and we work very closely with Auschwitz-Birkenau survivors. We send them flowers on their birthdays. We send them letters. I keep in very good touch with them. But out of that close relationship came out the project, the cookbook that we'll be talking about today.
That's great. Well, that is a good segue then into how did the idea of this cookbook come to be? And just to back up, I want to tell you that some of the teachers who were on the trip with you this summer are joining in on this program and watching today. So we've had such a good relationship so far. I hear the experience this past summer with you was amazing.
They are incredible, and they are doing all the hard work, teaching at the front line. So I have so much respect for them, and I'm so glad I cannot see them, but hi. I'm happy you're all here. So how did this project come to be? It's a good question. I ask myself that question a lot, especially because, I mean, I like to cook, but I'm no chef, and I certainly did not think that the first book I edit would be a cookbook. But truly the cookbook kind of came out naturally out of that close relationship we built with survivors, and specifically, and let's go back in time to pre-COVID world, 2019, exactly 5 years ago, our foundation was organizing a large delegation of Auschwitz-Birkenau survivors. We said, we want to bring you back to Auschwitz to commemorate jointly, to stand there united, the 75th anniversary of liberation of the camp. And the response was overwhelming. We got RSVPs from over 120 survivors. We brought them and their family members from many different countries, from the United States, from Canada, from Israel, but also from Australia, from South America. Some came from Sweden, different European countries. It was an incredibly international delegation, and it was large. I mean, it was almost 400 people altogether. We brought them to Krakow, we brought them to Auschwitz, and a couple of things happened while we were preparing. Also, just as a side note, we all came to Auschwitz. We commemorated the 75th anniversary, and looking back at it now, it was really incredible and amazing that we managed to do it right a month and a half before the global lockdown. And I believe that it was the last gathering of that scale, international gathering of that scale before the lockdown, certainly including survivors and heads of state, because these events are always joined by heads of state, and we had kings and queens and presidents. So it was truly an unforgettable and moving experience. But what happened while we were preparing the trip? Well, we became friends. We became friends with survivors. We got to meet their children, their grandchildren, and out of that, we built trust. And I like to emphasize, and anybody who works in the field of Holocaust education and has worked with survivors knows that trust is such a key element when it comes to gathering testimonies and when it comes to sharing testimonies. We became very close. And then when the world shut down and the global lockdown affected all of us, we naturally continued the relationship with survivors. We were so upset because we had these ambitious plans to have reunions and meet survivors here and there, and a reunion in California, and obviously it couldn't work. But paradoxically, because we all connected on Zoom, we got to see each other on regular basis every month, once a month. Every Zoom call, it was over 50, 60 survivors with children, grandchildren. It was really special. And also survivors from different time zones and different locations could join. And after a few of these calls, I was prepping for another Zoom call with our chairman, Ambassador Ronald Lauder, who was the champion and the leader of that delegation that came with us to Poland. And we were prepping for another call, and it was Passover 2020. And he said, what should we talk about today? And we were just sort of throwing different ideas. And we decided that we'll talk about cooking, because everybody was cooking. Everybody was learning how to bake bread and and so during one of these calls, he threw out a question. He said, what are you cooking for Passover? And he followed up with a question, oh, my grandma used to make gefilte fish like this, and did you add sugar? Did you not add sugar? And it was this whole conversation about gefilte fish. As a result of this really cute and earnest conversation, and at the end of the call, he said, okay, so if you have a good gefilte fish recipe, send it to Maria. And and I did receive 20 gefilte fish recipes, and we were laughing about this at first, but then then I thought, okay, there is something here. And our team started, going back to survivors, asking some follow-up questions. And then the board of our foundation gave us a green light to work on a full-on project, the cookbook that turned out to be the book that some of you may have.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so this is a picture. So exactly, this is on the right, it's Ambassador Lauder. In the very middle, holding his hand, is survivor Tova Friedman. Tova, some of you may know Tova because she's one of the children liberated in January in 1945. She's on that iconic photo of children showing their tattoos. She's one of the kids. And Tova was a member of our delegation. So this is a picture taken the day before the big official commemorative event. Lauder took the survivors, and then together they visited the memorial site. And I have to say, there is a special bond between survivors and Mr. Lauder. And many families told me that they wanted to participate in this cookbook project because also of the trust they have that whatever he does with survivors will honor their stories and will present their stories in a very dignified way. And in a way, again, it's going back to this idea of trust that was incredibly, it was just pivotal for making sure that we were able to go to some of the stories that survivors never shared before.
So, Maria, you talk about how this book is more than a cookbook, and you've kind of already given us a little context into these wonderful relationships that you've built, and that it took some time for everybody to begin communicating with one another. When people get this book, if they don't already have it, what will they find when they read and use this book?
Most literally, when you open the book, you'll notice that it's divided into sort of, there you go. These are the books stacked. When you open the book, you will realize that it's more than a cookbook, because the first part of the book consists of biographies and background stories of all the survivors featured. So in the most literal understanding of the phrase more than a cookbook, it is more than a cookbook because it's a book that first offers spotlights survivors. We were lucky to obtain archival photos. Some of the survivors, very few, but some of them had pre-war photos that they generously shared. Some of them have photos just right after the liberation. And we have 6 or 8 pages of this collage of images of survivors. And then every single person who's contributed to the book has a biographical note. So that's the beginning of the book. If you just want to cook, you can skip the first part and you can go to the second, which is a cookbook. However, you will never truly lose sight of survivors and the heart of the book, their testimonies, because every recipe is accompanied by a vignette, by a memory, by the survivor who contributed the recipe. So in that sense, it is a layered text. It has the archival layer, it has the recipes, it has the testimonies. We even included handwritten recipes, sort of originally scribbled on a piece of paper to add another sort of textured layer. And you also, in the beginning of the book, you have a couple of different essays that open up the book. There is a opening forward by Ambassador Lauder. There is a note from me as the editor explaining sort of how the book came to be. There is a special note from the director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau Museum, and he talks beautifully about the importance of food and cooking to tradition. And he says something like, you can imagine a table without a home. You can imagine a table standing under a tree, but you cannot really imagine a home without a table, that the table and that communal experience of sharing food is the heart, the beating heart of each family's home. And yeah, so in that sense, it's more than a cookbook, but more metaphorically, it's more than a cookbook, because it's a collection of these heirloom, these treasures. For most of the survivors we interviewed, these were their last testimonies.
Mm.
And what I found interesting is that talking to them about food, talking to them about scents, smells, colors, textures, evoked something unique, evoked a unique set of memories that they haven't shared, at least with me, before. And anybody who's worked with survivors knows that sometimes, often, our questions become very formulaic. We ask same questions. What was your life before World War II? When did things begin to change? What were the first signs of change? What do you remember from the camp? Like, it's survivors usually get very similar type of questions. What I found through this process, what I found out through this process is that these memories connected to the experience of cooking, food, eating,
Mm.
they triggered very primal memories, very deeply sort of hidden memories that they're usually not asked about. So I learned a lot about them.
I love that. I love that when you change up the questions and you bring something else into it, then it elicits different answers and different kinds of stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. So the book opens with a really unique recipe. Will you tell us the story behind this recipe at the beginning?
Yes, I think we have a couple of photos. So the book, I was thinking for a long time how to open up the book. There are many different ways to do it. There were different conceptions of how to divide chapters. I really wanted this simple recipe to open up the book. This is a recipe for a chocolate sandwich. I think we have a couple of other images that we can show of survivor Eugene Ginter. He lives in New York. I'm very lucky to be close with him and his family. And this is Eugene making the sandwich. And to me, the idea, Eugene shared with us a couple of different recipes. What they all have in common is that they're incredibly simple, and they take the idea of nourishment very literally. He provided us with recipes that helped him get stronger and healthier after the liberation. So this is a memory of a sandwich that he was eating in the DP camp. This is what was bringing him back to life. So he took this idea of food as nourishment in the most literal way. And I thought it was a beautiful way to open up this cookbook, because we didn't really want to, in many ways, when you think about the camps, obviously hunger is what you think of. So we wanted to address it right away, that thinking about Auschwitz-Birkenau is the opposite of thinking about nourishment and food and recipes. And even I think in the foreword by Mr. Lauder, he says that it almost sounds like a cruel joke, recipes of Auschwitz-Birkenau survivors. And that's Eugene Ginter and Mr. Lauder. But we learned a couple of things from survivors. One is that recounting recipes and thinking about food was a way for them also to connect to other prisoners during their time. This is the recipe during their time at the camps, but also this recipe conveys the idea of surviving thanks to food, exactly as I said, in the most literal way. So it's a simple recipe. I doubt that actually anybody would make it at home, but it was a sort of it took us back to the very beginning of the idea of survival.
Food and cooking is such a personal and also universal experience. And in this book, you've done such an amazing job of really highlighting both of these aspects. And I feel like this brings people today right into the memories and lives of those who survived and connects us to the history in a way that we can really feel and understand. I just wonder, like, can you tell us a little bit more about like what that experience was like collecting all of these recipes?
Yeah, so this idea of memory is fascinating. I think about it all the time, and survivors always say, you know, who will write our history, paraphrasing Nancy Spielberg's title of her movie. It's all about who will carry the torch of memory
Mhm.
forward, and especially at this existential moment of fear of forever losing survivors. But I always um, I always think about this concept that memory of us, of our life, lasts 2 to 3 generations after our death. The majority of people are unlikely to remember that we ever existed. And for people who don't have, you know, and that's the reality. So it, of course, historical events that impacted the world are not governed by the same laws. But this short-lived nature of memory really underscores the importance of the curation and preservation of memory, as memory goes hand in hand with forgetting. And to me, this was just another way of commemorating the lives of survivors, and also what became very clear. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how we collected the recipes, because it's a sweet story. But what became very clear to me as we received such positive feedback when the book came out is that it really, the universal nature of cooking made this book very accessible and interesting to non-Jewish audiences. There is something so, as I said, universal about the idea of tradition, passing history through recipes. I forget exactly how he phrased it in the foreword, but Lauder speaks in his opening, in the opening paragraphs of the books, that there is no better way to connect to our ancestors than through recipes they cooked, because you cannot wear their clothes, you cannot um, you cannot wear their shoes. There is nothing that it connects you to the past in a more tangible way than the recipes they cooked. You know, the challah baked in the 1930s is the challah we're baking today, and it's there is this um, beautiful idea of continuity, but also when it comes to recipes, as you can imagine, it was it was a long process. Some of the recipes we received were long and detailed. Some of them were informally scribbled and completely incomplete. Uh, but all of them captured something essential about each person, their family history and their story through food. So we spent a couple of months conducting multiple interviews with survivors, with their families, and kind of weaving this tapestry of these tales of flavors and memories and smells, and but also accounts of trauma. That is we never lost sight of that. It is an uplifting book, but stories that are shared with us are full of trauma and loss. So but um, somehow we managed to bring together these ideas of incredible pain and trauma, but also this idea of continued tradition and this uplifting, um, I think, message. A lot of survivors ultimately shared very uplifting messages with us.
So, Maria, you said something that just makes me pause, and I just want to circle back to it for a moment. And you were talking about how memory lives on for 2 to 3 generations. And we're in this critical time where there's so few Holocaust survivors still living, and those who are still alive were primarily young children during the Holocaust. So a lot of their memories are coming to them as part of their family's stories. And I just it makes me think how recipes and cooking goes on for many generations. It kind of transcends that 2 to 3 generations worth of memory. But in your work on this, I mean, that kind of scares me, 2 to 3 generations. Like what else does that, maybe this is too big of a question, but what else does that mean for us? Like how else do we preserve these stories and memories so that they're meaningful if it kind of has this
No, I think
shelf
that,
life?
I think historical events and historical figures and survivors are historical figures. They escape this cruel nature of the short-lived nature of memory. I
Mhm.
think the fact that they share their testimonies, they've written books. There's so many institutions. Um, there's so many institutions that have devoted so many programs to preserve memory. I was just putting it in the context of our our regular.
Mhm.
I will be forgotten after 2 generations. I don't think survivors will be forgotten. That's what I meant. I just think that within that context of how short our memory is, um, everybody understands how important it is to preserve the memory of this special group of people.
I think that's so important. I to put it in that context and to remember, and also to recognize how there is such a tremendous effort being made to preserve this history for so much longer. But it is like pushing against the natural tide of things in a way.
Yeah, yeah,
So I love that these recipes, I mean, cooking kind of outlives most everything, right? Like there's recipes and the stories, and they get passed down, and we experience them in kind of this multi-dimensional way.
exactly. That's beautifully said. Exactly.
Will you give us, you told us about the first story in the book. Can you give us some other examples of the stories and recipes that are in the book?
Yes, there there are many different sort of groups of recipes. Some of them, like recipes shared by Eugene, as I mentioned, they're very sort of concrete, simple recipes that were important to survivors after the liberation. There's some other recipes that evoke this idea of trauma and World War II experience. One of the recipes that always comes to my mind is Eva Scheinblum's recipe, survivor Eva Scheinblum. She gave us a recipe for rakot krumpli, a very simple recipe for like a layered baked potato dish, like a casserole almost dish. And when we followed up with her and her family and asked why this recipe, she shared that this was the last meal her family shared before they were taken to Auschwitz-Birkenau. So you have this recipe that carries this most beautiful memory of the last meal that family shared, and that is undercut by this trauma of being the last meal shared before they were taken to Auschwitz. Then there is a whole group of recipes uh, shared by actually a son of a survivor, Goldie Finkelstein. Her son, she passed away before we got to work on this book, but her son is involved with our foundation. And he very openly spoke to me about the fact that his mother, when she moved, she came from a very affluent family. She lived in Poland. She had a maid, she had a cook. She didn't know how to cook. And she learned how to cook from Auschwitz-Birkenau survivors in New Jersey. That is how she learned how to cook. But she overcooked. She overfed her family. Every meal ended with a cake. Nobody ever went hungry. And it became clear in my conversations with her son is that she, in a way, used cooking as a way, trauma processing, as a way to process trauma, and also the connection between loss, hunger, and scarcity was so strong that she always wanted there to be abundance of food, and she never not wanted to have food. So that's another group of recipes. And then there are recipes, recipes that evoke these sort of vignettes, images of pre-war Eastern Europe. There are a couple of those, and one of the ones I like to talk about is a recipe and story shared by Ben Lesser, a survivor of who shared a memory of his grandfather's pre-World War II orchard in Munkac. And he talks about the colors, the smells, the plums, the apples, and it was this child's early memory of a very innocent world, not to romanticize the sort of pre-World War II Eastern European life, Jewish life, but there was something so beautiful about that innocence of that moment when this child just had a happy summer experience, picking, early summer, picking plums, and that was special. And then I also want to talk. I have a very special relationship with survivor Tova Friedman, who just celebrated her birthday 3 days ago. So if you can, and she's on Instagram and she's on TikTok. So if you can, please go onto her Instagram and wish her a very happy birthday when we're done here today. She's an incredible person, and I'm very honored to be close with Tova. And during our conversations, it's not really about the recipes that she shared, but talking about recipes opened a relationship up. I think Tova is listening to this. I think I'm just Tova. I'm so happy.
She just wrote in the chat. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Okay, I'm so happy. Tova, that's very special. Tova is with us today. So I hope that Tova doesn't mind me sharing that. To me, she shared very simple recipes. I actually love one of the recipes she shared. I love and I make in the fall. It's a kasha verniczka. Is this recipe of like you mix kasha and pasta and mushrooms. So it's a cheap, very nourishing one pot type of a meal. And then she also shared a recipe for the tzimmes. But the recipes, to me, were almost less important than the conversations that came out of that process. And I felt that our friendship went really much deeper because we started talking about food and trauma, and she shared that she had dreams about swimming in egg yolks when she was a child. So this idea of food and being able to eat or not being able to eat were some of the obsessive thoughts that kept on coming back. And also, of course, she shares, as many survivors share. I think Eugene Ginter is also on the call. I'm so happy. Hi, Eugene. I will call you after this. This is very special. This is very special. So, Tova and other survivors shared with me. This is a very sweet. Tova shared with me, as other survivors share, that in their families nothing goes to waste. That they did instill in their children this idea of, we are not wasting food, and this idea of being very particular about not throwing things away, and to the point of almost becoming an obsessive habit. And they're very honest about it, and they discuss it within the context of the trauma they went through.
Maria, I think it says so much about the relationship and community that you've built through your work and just your own openness and curiosity and interest that, these survivors and teachers, that they are all here listening to this presentation today.
I'm so happy. Yeah, thank you. This is
Um,
Tova. This is the Timus. Yeah, this is Tova. And um, go ahead, Ilana. I just wanted to say
yeah.
something about photography, but perhaps you do have a question about that.
No, please go right ahead. Well, let's talk about the photography.
Because this photo of Tova made me think of how incredibly indebted we are to our photographer, Ellen Silverman, who is a wonderful person and an incredibly talented photographer. And we wanted this book, Mr. Lauder wanted this book to be beautiful. And I'm really proud of the fact that these are some of the some of the images, the cake, and there's some other recipes, I think, some of the photography. We wanted the images to be timeless and elegant and minimalistic. The idea was to this is Eugene and Tova. I love this picture. Just love this picture. But there were two ideas that we had. One is that we wanted to strip the food out of any additional sort of context and props. I felt that a lot of Eastern European Jewish cookbooks have this rustic look to them, almost showing, in a way, almost simplifying the pre-war Jewish life in Eastern Europe, and also only showing the sort of like rustic, more shtetl type of an aesthetic. But talking to our survivors, for example, talking to Eugene, who grew up in an affluent family in Krakow, a very different experience. Just like I mentioned, Goldie Finkelstein, who also had a cook chef. Like it's just the experience of Jewish pre-World War II life was incredibly nuanced, rich, and I didn't want it. And this is Michael Bornstein, another survivor featured in the cookbook. So I wanted all the recipes to be shown in a very minimalistic way to emphasize the idea that, as I said before, the challah that we bake in 2024 in New York City is exactly the same challah that we baked in Warsaw in 1924. That the recipe and the food is what connects us. And two, it was very important to me to have survivors in the book. And it was not easy because it was during lockdown. 5 survivors, Michael Bornstein, who you just saw, Lois Flamholz, Tova Friedman, Eugene Ginter, and David Marks, came to Manhattan in October 2021. And we reunited at a special photo shoot, and they represented the community, just the 5 of them, and we had a special opportunity to photograph them. And I think that these contemporary images, alongside the vintage photographs that open up the volume, really connect the past with the present, and they create a sort of visual anchor for all the recipes, of honey cakes and everything in between. I also think that it's very rare to see older people in cookbooks, older hands. Usually cookbooks are full of, young women or middle-aged women, but it's very rare to see older people. And I was very special. And I think it also just adds a layer to this volume.
Yeah, that really struck me because it's the images of this kind of old world Jewish food are in such a contemporary modern setting and in this modern looking beautiful book, and that it is noticeable, and it did make me think like, oh, I don't usually see it in this way. I really loved that.
Thank you.
So Maria, did you try all these recipes? Like, did you actually make them all and go through them and make sure they could be remade? How did that work?
So yes and no, I don't eat meat. So I did test out the non-meat recipes, and we internally within our foundation, we're small. We're, as I say, we're small but mighty. We did divide, and this was the very initial wave of testing, just to make sure they can be replicated. So before we even um, send it to people who more professionally do that. We did. So I spent a lot of time cooking during COVID, and it was actually a really nice experience, and it made our team also bond. And then we had people who tested it in a more, I guess, professional way, who would go back to the ingredients, make sure that everything is just properly annotated, and that was the second and third stage. But initially, I did cook the recipes that did not have meat. Yeah.
Well, we have a number of questions that I would love to make sure we have time to ask you. So, let me just dive in with one of them here that came from Debbie, who's watching this on Facebook, and she asks, did more favorite memories about food go toward desserts and sweets or main dishes? And she says, I ask because I have heard survivors say how they have a sweet tooth because they remember getting candy from soldiers who rescued them.
It's actually interesting. Intuitively, I would say yes. And now that I'm thinking about the list of our recipes, I think if you were to look at the number of dessert and sweet leaning recipes, I think we do have more of those. So I think there is something to it. Yes.
So other than the first recipe, which is unusual and a little bit surprising that you talked about, are there other recipes or other things that you gathered that just really took you by surprise? Maybe even things that didn't make it into the book.
So we actually put everything we got with the exception of repeats of almost identical recipes, and they were mostly gefilte fish. But I think we put three in, and we are like, okay, I think this is enough.
We're
But
good.
there is one special recipe, and we put it into the book because of the special relationship that Mr. Lauder and his wife had with Elie Wiesel
Hmm.
and his family. They were close friends. And when we were working on this cookbook, Marion Wiesel, Wiesel's wife, Elie Wiesel, passed away before we started working on this book. But I just want to say that David Marks's wife, David, passed away unfortunately during COVID, but his wife Kathy is on the call, so I just want to give a shout out to Kathy. So glad she's here. But Elie Wiesel's wife Marion shared with us his latkes recipe. So the recipe that we have for latkes, and it was actually, I'll tell you a secret. I had the title before I had the latkes recipe. I wanted to name the book Honey Cake and Latkes because I just love this title. Once I thought of it, I couldn't. There was nothing else. But I was talking to Mr. Lauder. I said we have a problem because we don't have a latkes recipe, and that is how we got the Elie Wiesel latkes recipe. And it's a controversial recipe because it calls for no onions. And I understand there is a debate whether, from what I understand, the majority favors the onions. So, but that's a special recipe, and it was very meaningful for us to be able to include it.
I prefer the no onions, so I'll use
Okay,
the.
so you're the Elie Wiesel team. I got.
That's fantastic. That is really fantastic. So are you I feel like since this book has come out and just in the interest of time, this will be my last question for you. I am sure you have been, I feel like people have sent you recipes ongoing. Will there be any, do you have any plans for an additional book? Is there anything else in the works? What are you working on now?
So right now we are working on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. It's hard to believe that almost 5 years have passed. And I will be going with survivors in January 2025 back to Auschwitz. Mr. Lauder is putting a delegation again together. So if you know any Auschwitz-Birkenau survivors, or if there are any Auschwitz-Birkenau survivors on this call who would like to join our delegation, please get in touch with us. But we are not planning any other cookbooks, but we would like to, we are beginning to think about another book that hopefully will come out naturally out of the 80th anniversary. It's a little bit too soon to talk about it, but we are thinking about something else. But I just wanted to mention to anybody who might be, who might want to buy this book, I just want to make sure that I tell you that 100% of the proceeds from this book go towards our program, Auschwitz Legacy Fellowship, that funds these educational trips for non-Jewish American high school teachers that we run. 100% of the proceeds go towards it. Whatever Amazon doesn't take from us, everything else goes towards the educational program. So it is a charity project, that cookbook. In that sense, it's even more special in my opinion.
And do you have any preference if you were to send people where to buy the book? And
Look, I mean, look, Amazon has always the cheapest price. They always have, like, I think, right, I was just looking today, I think it's on sale right now. Barnes and Noble also sells it. Different Jewish museums all over the country sell it. For example, I know that the Jewish Museum in New York sells it. The Neue Galerie in New York City sells it too. So there are a couple of different places. If you Google honey cake and latkes and you go into the shopping tab, you will see many different price points actually in places. So
wonderful.
depends what your preference is.
Maria, thank you so much for your incredible work, for this beautiful book. It has been such a joy being able to talk with you today and to hear these stories. For anyone who doesn't have the book yet, I really encourage you to get it, especially as we get close to the holidays, the Jewish holidays and the non-Jewish holidays. Maybe there's something in there you want to try making. And I think it's also an inspiration, at least to me, to collect some of my family recipes and to keep them and be able to pass them along. That is just a wonderful lesson and a way to kind of pass this history through the generations.
Thank you
Is
so
there
much thank you so much. And I want to thank you, Alana. I want to thank Richard for organizing this. Big shout out to your mom, Ilana, who I think is on the call. And a huge thanks to Eugene Ginter and his wife Rochelle, who are on the call, and I know their daughter Heather is on the call, to Tova Friedman and Kathy Parks. It's really special, and thank you all for joining me today. I felt like we were doing it together. And I'm seeing the names of our fellows in the chat, so thank you all for joining. It's so sweet of you to join.
What a wonderful, wonderful community. Thank you so
Very
much, Maria.
Thank you
And
so much.
And thank you to everyone, as Maria said, who is watching this program today. Our next Lunch and Learn program is going to be in 1 month on October 8th, so I hope you will come back. It's going to be a very different kind of conversation with Detective Elizabeth Waring from the Seattle Police Department. She's going to be talking about the police department's response to hate crimes and anti-Semitism in our community. All of this work that we do would not be possible without this exceptional team at the Holocaust Center. Special thanks to Richard Green, who is behind the scenes and running this program. And thank you to our entire team, our interim CEO, Lynn Smith, Jessica Michaels, Paul Regelbrug, Brenda Anderson, Lori Werschel-Cohen, Lexi Jason, Amanda Davis, Lisa Spink, Katie Lawrence, Michael Langberg, Liz Hall, Arlene Lugtu, Mario Felipe Bamonte, and Rosa Campos. Thank you also to the Conference on Material Claims Against Germany for their support of this Lunch and Learn program. And again, thank you to all of you for watching today. I look forward to seeing you at our next program in October. This concludes our program for today.